Hello, dear friends. Welcome to my thought for the day on this day, which is the second Sunday of Advent. I'm going to light my Advent candle, and I hope if you have a chance to, you might pause me, find your own candle, and let's light it together. I'm just going to strike my match. I'm not using one of the battery-operated ones because they don't give the same kind of beautiful light that my little candle gives me. So this is the second Sunday of Advent. There are 4 Sundays in Advent. And Advent is all about coming, the arrival, the coming. And we remember in Advent that Jesus came the first time and he's coming a second time. So it's a wonderful thing, and the reminder, of course, of the light, that the light was coming into the world and the darkness could not overcome it. That's in John chapter 1. I'm going to put my candle down, but leave it lit while we have our thought for the day. And the first coming of Jesus was foretold over and over and over again in the Old Testament in lots of different ways, some direct and some indirect. And the more you study the Old Testament, you find hidden in the Old Testament little glimpses of the promise of Jesus coming. And if you've ever been to one of those wonderful 9 lessons and carols services, they read some of these promises, not many of them, but the most important, well, the most obvious ones, I suppose. So I'm starting right back in Genesis with the promise of the Redeemer. If you haven't read Genesis 1 to 3 recently, it's something you could do today as an Advent. Chapter 1 tells us all about the creation of the world, and chapter 2 tells us all about the creation of man and woman. And then chapter 3 is the temptation of Adam and Eve. And we all know the story, and we all mistakenly think it was an apple. It doesn't tell us it was an apple. It tells us it was the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which was the tree that they were told they could not eat from, the one tree they were forbidden to eat from. And we have the serpent comes and speaks to Eve. And it's interesting, really, when you think about what the temptation was. The temptation was not to doubt that God had spoken. That was not the temptation. Satan actually doesn't have any problem with us hearing from God. It's what we hear that he tempts us to doubt, to reason, to put our reason in place. You know, that's what he says. He says, what did God say? You shall not eat of any tree in the garden. Did God say that? Did he say that? And she says, quite rightly, we may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but God said, you shall not eat of the fruit of the tree, which is in the midst of the garden. Neither shall you touch it, lest you die. That's what God had said. She remembered it, exactly what God had said. The first temptation was, surely God wouldn't withhold from you something nice. That's the first thought. If it's a nice fruit, why would he say you can't eat it? And she hasn't got an answer for that. But sometimes the truth is that God does not let us do certain things because they would harm us. And the problem with eating of this fruit was that it brought a knowledge of good and evil. It changed them forever, eating this fruit, and it was something God didn't want them to do. So he told them they couldn't eat it. And sometimes God doesn't let us do a certain thing because it wouldn't be the right thing for us. It might be the right thing for somebody else, but maybe it's not the right thing for you. And our human reasoning says, well, as Satan tempted, God's not going to hold you to account for that. He didn't really mean it. Doubting God, raising questions. You know, one of the most difficult things about studying the scriptures is our questioning mind. our questioning mind, which God gave us, and our inquiring mind, which has enabled man and woman to explore and discover and make use of all sorts of things in the natural world. Because we've asked questions of the natural world. We've said, what makes that work? Or how does that flower do what it does? And we've learned things because we've asked questions. And asking questions in itself is not bad. But asking questions that lead to doubt is a problem. You know, I can't think of how many people have said to me, yes, but what about? What about who did Cain marry? Where did his wife come from? The Bible must be wrong because it doesn't tell us. And what happened to this and what happened to that? And why don't we know about this? And why don't we know about that? And I've learned from this passage that the best thing to do with questions is to say, if the Bible does not give us the answer to that question, we don't need to know it. We have enough in the Bible to prepare us and teach us how to live our lives successfully in this world. And we shouldn't pursue questions that lead to doubts, because they destroy us. And that's what the enemy wants to do. He wants to kill, steal, and destroy. That's John chapter 10. He wants us to doubt God's word. But God has given us everything we need for life and godliness in this book. And the things that are untaught and unsaid are not necessary to us. So be careful about asking questions. So he says, you won't die. God's not like that. God's not like that. He's not going to make you die. And of course it seems, once she has eaten, that she isn't going to die immediately. But what has happened is that sin has entered the world and spoiled everything. And that death has come to her. Death and sickness, and to her husband as well, once they'd both eaten of it. Life changed forever. They didn't have that open, ready relationship with God that they'd had before, because sin had come into it. And they changed the way they behaved. They knew they were naked. They felt guilty for something that didn't matter. They were created without clothing, as all the other animals were, and there was no need for clothing. But and they died spiritually the moment they ate the fruit, and they died physically, and death came in, and slowly the length of life shortened. But the promise of the Redeemer is later on, is when God speaks and he curses the serpent that tempted them. And in verse 15 of chapter 3, he says, I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. This is the promise of Jesus. Jesus, the seed of the woman. There's the promise of Mary there in that verse, that a woman would bear a child, and that child would bruise the head of the serpent, and the serpent would bruise that child, that descendant of the woman. And that is the first promise of Jesus, that there would come one, the Redeemer. As soon as the problem arises, God has the solution. Now you may ask, why did God let sin come into the world at all? Now we don't know the answer to that. And the answer to the question, why does so much awfulness happen in our world, we don't know. But what God did not want was robots or automatons that could only ever do the right thing. He wanted people that he could relate to and have a relationship with. And based only on this chapter, you can know that God's greatest desire from you is a relationship. He wants a relationship with you. He wants a relationship with you where you choose him, where you choose to follow him, not because you have to, but because you have free will and you can choose. And as you choose to follow him, he becomes your friend and your redeemer. He becomes the one who accompanies you in every moment of your life. And he deals with the sin that you cannot deal with. We cannot deal with sin. We cannot conquer it. We cannot forgive it. Only God can forgive it. And God provided the promise here in Genesis of the Redeemer to come. Have a great day, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.